We are reviewing the Weston tomato strainer versus the Reber No. 3 tomato strainer. We will assemble both units, discuss the pros and cons of each, and see the Reber in action. The Reber tomato strainer versus the Weston tomato strainer. Let's assemble them both and discuss the pros and cons. To assemble the Weston, you have the option of a C-clamp to clamp it to your counter, or a suction. Press the white lever down to engage the suction. Now it is stable. Grab the shaft and the spring. The spring should slide onto the shaft like this, and the black O-ring should face inside. Grab the gasket and place it at the base of the tomato screen. The plastic auger is next. You will see a rectangular shape here. This matches the shaft. Turn it until it locks in place, like so. Next, grab the screen, and we're going to line it up. So this spot here needs to line up with here. There will be resistance due to the spring. So pushing hard inward, push in, and rotate it. Now it's locked in place. Tighten the screw. Insert the handle on the right-hand side of the machine. Turn until it locks in place. The plastic chute snaps onto the end. The hopper sits on the top. The splash guard snaps on from the back. You can hear it snap in place. You can now move it up or down depending on the height of your bowl. And of course, the stomper for the top. Next, we're going to assemble the Reber. So first we need to start by attaching the base. The base is quite heavy, so you notice that it's held on by two studs. We need to unscrew the nuts. So go ahead and do that. Don't lose them. Set them aside. And you can see where it will line up. While holding this in place, reattach the nuts. You can start it with your fingers, and we'll tighten it with the attach tool. Attach the second nut. I'm just going to start it with my fingers, loosely. Then you can use the provided tool here to tighten it a little bit further. That side is tight. Same thing with the other one. Oops. And that one is already tight. Once that is secure, we're going to grab the shaft. The spring goes on the plastic side, like that. And the metal side with the O-ring needs to face internally. Next, grab your screen and your auger. Like the Weston, the auger has a cutout that matches the shaft. So rotate until it pops in. Now it's in place. Insert the tomato screen. Rotate until you find the opening. Push in and turn until locked in place. The chute is already attached and is not a separate piece. Next, grab the gasket and place it on the bottom of the hopper, like so. Place the hopper on the top. With the Reber, there is some slight threading, so you will need to turn it to tighten it, rather than resting it on top. The splash guard is attached with a wire that conveniently raises and lowers. Push the wire until it reaches underneath the lip. Now it is locked in place. The top of the splash guard simply snaps right on top. You can raise or lower it depending on the height you would like. And to finish, the plunger is ready to go into the hopper. Let's discuss the pros and cons of the Weston versus the Reber. To start with, the Weston is a hand crank machine, so it will be slower and more tiring to use. The Reber is an electric machine, so there's no hand cranking, it's much faster, and you won't have that musculoskeletal fatigue. Both of the units have a plastic auger. However, the plastic auger on the Weston has cracked. Now, I've used mine for many years, so it does have a crack in it. The plastic auger on the Reber is also plastic, but it's a more durable, heavy-duty plastic, and to this point has not cracked. The hoppers. The hopper on the Weston is very large, so I like that. You can fit a large capacity of tomatoes in it at a time. The hopper on the Reber is medium size. The diameter of the hopper is larger on the Weston, so it makes it easier to push the tomatoes down with the plunger. The diameter is just slightly smaller on the Reber, not by much, but somewhat, and it does make a difference on how hard it is to push it down with the plunger, although minimal. The plastic splash guard. So this Weston has a plastic splash guard. Now it is a little bit flimsy. The tabs have broken off on mine, and there is cracking also going along it. So the quality of this splash guard is not great. The Reber splash guard, it's not a separate piece. You can see that it's all stainless steel and the splash guard is part of the screen. So I like that design better. This one has a suction cup or clamp for securing the unit. However, the Reber, the machine is so heavy that it doesn't need to be secured in any way. The weight of the machine holds it in place by itself. Here's another bonus for the Weston. I like the height of the Weston. So the height of the Weston accommodates a bowl perfectly. So when I slide a bowl right under there, it's at the correct height to dump the pulp and the sauce out of the chute. Whereas the Reber sits low. So I can't put a bowl underneath the chute the way it sits naturally. And the Reber does not have legs. I wish it had legs to raise it up higher. So I have to put the whole unit on a separate object to bring the height up to accommodate a bowl. So that is a downfall for the Reber versus the Weston. Both of them are equally slow to clean. I do hand wash all of the components, although I prefer cleaning stainless steel versus plastic. This machine, because it's hand crank, it is quiet, and the Reber is going to be loud when it's running. That's pretty self-explanatory. It is a motor that's running. The Weston is affordable, and the Reber is a bit on the pricey side. So my overall opinion is I like both machines. I truly do. I've had this one for many years, and I finally upgraded to the Reber. If you're only going to do smaller batches, I would choose the Weston. It's priced affordable, and it gets the job done. On the other hand, if you're going to be doing large batches, such as I do, it can get pretty tiring to crank on this for a 16-hour day. You will be a little bit tired and sore at the end of the day. So this one totally eliminates the fatigue that you're going to have. It's also faster. So for large, serious tomato growers, if you can afford the Reber, I would go with that. If you're just kind of a hobbyist, I would do the Weston. Let's pick some tomatoes in the garden, bring them in the house, and test the machine. So when picking tomatoes, it's nice if you can keep the sepals attached. So I just try to get 2 fingers over it like that with a V and pull. So if you can keep the sepals and stem on, it'll last a little bit longer. Versus if you just rip it off like that. Well, now there's an opening on the top, and that's going to rot a lot faster. Tomatoes crush pretty easily, so I kind of try to be as gentle as I can when pouring out my bowl. This is my cat Spaz here, and she's hanging out in Lucy's spot. Uh-oh. That's Lucy's territory. She usually doesn't hang out in the tomatoes like Lucy does. But she does like to follow me around, so. Check out this beautiful harvest that I've carried into the house. I love all of the beautiful diversity of these open pollinated tomatoes. All of the shapes and colors are absolutely stunning. Tomatoes are my favorite crop to grow, and I really love breeding tomatoes. If you'd like to learn how to breed your own tomato varieties, I have a video on YouTube. I also recommend learning how to save your own tomato seeds. I have a video on that as well, so be sure to check it out on my channel. So I got my work cut out for me. We're going to put this machine to the test and see how many gallons I can get done today. I've been using the Weston tomato press for years, and this year I decided to upgrade to a motorized version. This thing is a game changer. It's called the Reber No. 3 tomato strainer, and it's made in Italy. It's sold on Raw Roots and Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. But this bad boy, she's a beast. It works great. No more hand cranking. It was very tiring to hand crank for hours on end with that Weston. Although I liked it, this thing is wonderful. So my goal today is to show you how to use it if you're considering buying it for yourself. I do have a few tips I want to discuss with you before we begin. First of all, the Reber does not have legs. So you need to put it up on something so that you have room to put a bowl under the 2 chutes. So this chute will dispense the sauce. On the left-hand side, it's going to dispense the pulp, so the skin, seed, and core. So if I were to just put this on the counter, there wouldn't be room to put the bowls underneath. So put it up on something. Also, I like to use a ladder or a step stool. I'm not particularly tall, so I need to get up on a ladder. And what I find is I would rather have my shoulders down to be more ergonomically friendly and have my shoulders down pressing all day like this, rather than if I'm at floor height, I'm going to have my arms up like this all day, and that would be more tiring. So I do recommend a step stool for shorter folks such as myself. Another tip I want to talk about is when you're plunging this, I think the diameter is smaller for the Reber versus the Weston, so it's helpful to chop the tomatoes a little bit smaller as you're preparing them to go into the hopper. Also make sure that you're not too aggressive with the plunger and pushing it down super hard and fast. The reason is that it's going to splatter everywhere and make more of a mess in your kitchen. So just kind of let it, feed down a little bit at a natural pace and slowly plunge it down. Don't be too aggressive. I also recommend that you wear clothes that you don't care about, so some older clothes that you don't mind getting stained. Tomatoes will stain your apron and your shirt, so make sure that you wear some older clothing. We do a lot of applesauce too. Applesauce is worse, but tomato stains as well. So that's a good tip. So we're going to get started, and I will show you a bowl of some beautiful rainbow colored chopped tomatoes to run through here. I'll give you some examples of other sauce as well and the results that we can get from this machine. I want to show you the workflow of this whole operation that we're doing. So if one person can start out washing and chopping. So we've got the sink here, we can easily wash, chop, and then from there we're going to fill a 5-gallon bucket. These are food safe buckets, so these are the raw chopped tomatoes. You can also fill bowls as well. Once they're chopped, they head over to the machine, and the next person will be running it through the machine, which I previously showed you. I take these bowls when they're full and I transfer them again to a 5-gallon bucket. So this is the raw sauce coming right out of the machine, and it's cold. From there, we're going to head over to the stove, and I have a nice big stock pot, and this is where I'm going to be simmering this. It's required to simmer it for 20 minutes according to the Ball canning book for food safety, obviously, but we simmer it much longer than that. It's nice to evaporate the water and thicken it up a bit, so you can certainly go longer than 20 minutes. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this is going to be simmering all day long, basically, as we're canning. So that is that. And then we've got our water bath canner. You can see that we have a round going right now. This will be canning for 40 minutes. And I really like this model because it has a clear lid. The older ones were just a solid color lid, and I like the glass top because I can actually see the water, like how much it's boiling, and I can adjust the flame accordingly to get it right. So I do like this one. I'll put a link in the description. Also, I really like these stainless steel funnels that I use for filling the jars. The typical canning kits are going to be, it's a blue plastic one that it comes with, but I like the stainless steel if I'm going to be heating things up, hot food on plastic. I'm not a fan of that, so I'd prefer stainless steel. I can put a link in the description for that as well. Meanwhile, since I don't have enough burner space, I'm actually heating up my glass jars in a container on an electric burner, just because that's the only option I have. I don't have another burner. So those jars are heating, the sauce is simmering, the canner is going, person's cutting, person's running the machine. So this is kind of the cycle that we'll do. Now the machine is fast, so eventually the sauce will be made, and the bottleneck is the canning. Each canning cycle is like 40 to 60 minutes per cycle, so that is the bottleneck. So often I'll be canning, into the next few days, but we'll get it all wrapped up. This machine is advertised to process 300 pounds of tomatoes per hour. For me personally, it takes me 1 to 1.5 days to go pick or harvest all the tomatoes from my field. Then it took approximately 2 days to process and start the canning. Now this is 40.5 gallons that I did on Labor Day weekend. So in 2 days I could make 40.5 gallons of sauce. I wasn't quite able to finish canning that, so I did have to do some canning in the evenings after work. But that should give you a rough estimate of how fast you can go. Some variables include how many helpers you have and how many burners you have going for canning. The first step is harvesting your tomatoes. Then you want to bring them in and wash and chop them. There are some slight differences in how I chop them from the Weston versus this Reber machine. So let's zoom in and I'll give you some examples of how to chop them. Now, for a currant tomato, which are these really itty bitty small ones here, I'm not even going to chop them at all. I'm going to leave them whole. Currant tomatoes are very small, about the size of a marble. So we'll leave that as is and throw it into the bowl. A smaller cherry, such as this, I would at least cut it in half. But I'm going to be cutting it smaller into quarters with the Reber. One thing I've noticed is with the Weston, I would quarter the larger tomatoes and half the small ones. The diameter of the shoot is smaller with the Reber and a little more difficult to push down. So it makes it easier if you cut them smaller. It'll be easier to push through the machine. So normally with the Weston, I would half that. I would even consider quartering this. So this is kind of a cherry sized. You can have it if you want, it's just you'll be pushing harder on the shoot. Here's another size, another example. I'll just go ahead and quarter that one. Small pears, I'm still just going to have that. Like so. This is a semi-hollow. You're going to want to make sure you pull the stem off. Throw that in your compost. I'm going to go ahead and put that into eighths and throw that into your bowl. Here's a globe type tomato. Again, I'm going to just pull the stem off. What's nice is you don't have to cut the core out. The machine will remove that. So that does speed things up nicely, just the same as the Weston would do. That one's a good size. It's a little bit softer variety as well. Now here's an example of, this is Mila, so kind of an elongated pear type. It's a paste. So, you know, a lot of times for seed saving, I'm going to cut that horizontally and save the seeds. Check out my video on seed saving for details on that. But this is a paste variety, so it's going to be drier and more firm. So it is nice to have that cut a little smaller if possible. Again, to make it easier to push through the shoot. So here's a nice big old monster beefsteak here. So this one I'm going to want to chop up quite a bit. Now normally, you know, pull the stem off good enough. But when the core is really big like this, I will take the extra couple seconds here to just cut that out. You wouldn't have to, again, because the machine will separate the core, the seeds, and the skin from it. But when they're really big like that, I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So let's slice this monster up. It's not like there's any hard rule to the size you cut. It's just how hard do you want to work when you're pushing it down the chute of the machine. I'd rather cut them smaller and not have to push as hard on the machine. So I think that's a pretty good size for a beefsteak one. So I'll meet you at the machine and I'll give you some examples of how to use it. Here is how beautiful the chopped fruit is. I really don't get tired looking at this. It's almost too pretty to eat. I'm sure a cake decorator would feel the same way. I also want to add that you don't want to run the machine dry, so I don't want to turn it on right now with nothing in it. I'm going to put this into the hopper and push it down to allow the juice from the tomato to kind of seep down into it first for lubrication, and then I'll turn it on. It's kind of nice to use a spoon to not spill them everywhere and just lower it into the hopper. Oops, sometimes I do drop one. So before I turn it on, I'm going to push down and get some of that juice flowing in there. Now it's a paste variety, so it is not particularly juicy, but you can kind of hear that squeegee noise. So now we're going to power it on. Paste varieties, because they have little juice, are a little bit more difficult to push through the machine. Because they have little juice, they make an excellent thick sauce. This variety, named Mila, is one of my favorites, and I like it so much that I decided to use it in my breeding. I can't get over the quality that the Mila variety produces. So that completes the first pass of one bowl of Mila tomatoes. I'm just going to use this spoon now to scrape this out into the bowl. And I'm also going to scrape the screen. So this is the tomato screen. It also works with apples, so apple and tomato. It looks like I made a really nice thick sauce. Just as good, if not actually better than last year's. So I'm just stirring that just so you can visualize the thickness of that. I would compare this to applesauce, if not thicker than that, depending on your variety, of course. So yes, this paste variety really made a nice thick orange sauce. Now here's the pulp that came off of that. It's pretty dry even on the first pass. So I'm going to run this through a second time and we can see how much comes off. Now keep in mind this is a paste variety. This is much different than doing a blend. Now we're going to run the pulp through a second pass. Typically the pulp is easier to pass through than the first run. Stir your sauce. Beautiful. So one thing I like with the Reber press here is that I only need 2 passes. The pulp is dry enough with just 2 passes versus the Weston, I always did 3 passes. This one only needs 2. So right there you're saving some time and definitely saving my shoulder and back from hurting after cranking for 16 hours at a time. So definitely a bonus for that. Let's move on to a next type of tomato. Next we're going to run a blend of kind of some globe type. So I have Aunt Lou's Underground Railroad, black cherry, I got a Burpees Jubilee in there, I think a green zebra, so kind of a blend here. So let's see what that one looks like with the machine ready to go. A blend is faster and easier to run through the machine. It also splatters a lot more as there is more liquid. Don't worry about too much liquid. We'll cook it down on the stove before we preserve it. I grow many varieties of tomatoes. This particular batch includes green zebra, Burpees Jubilee, black cherry, and Aunt Lou's Underground Railroad. It is quite a juicy blend. Let's see how we did with the first pass on this one. Go ahead and scrape that screen off again. So throughout the day, you will want to occasionally disassemble the machine and clean this screen. It will get plugged. You know, we use it for many, many hours at a time. So, you know, it's normal to have to just clean the screen. But in the meantime, I just scrape it with a spoon to kind of keep it from plugging up so I don't have to take it apart as often. So that's a nice looking sauce. This is kind of more typical of what I would see with a blend of a juicier. Aunt Lou's Underground Railroad is a juicier variety. And cherries tend to be a little juicier as well, so I would expect this one to be runnier. Here's the pulp. So again, we only need to run the pulp 2 times, which is awesome. Definitely a time saver. So you can see there's some moisture in the pulp. We'll get that last bit out. And the pulp is so much quicker to run through the second time. That was very quick. So here's the pulp left over. Basically skin and seeds, all nice and dry. So there is some sauce there. I'm going to be dumping this into a food safe bucket and blending that. I'm using a 5-gallon food safe bucket, and I went ahead and I blended that really thick orange paste with the runnier red sauce and blended that together. And I just want to show you what that looks like now. It still has a really nice consistency to it. And so when I can this, it'll be simmering on the stove, which also helps kind of reduce some of the moisture and thicken it slightly as well. Next, we're going to show an example of a semi-hollow variety. This is one of my favorites. It's green bell. It's literally a tomato that looks like a green bell pepper. So it's a semi-hollow, and we're going to go ahead and run that through and see what that one looks like. You can see it up in the hopper. I'm a fan of the semi-hollow tomatoes. The variety we're looking at here is the green bell pepper tomato. It's a variety that does really well in my area. Another favorite is called Tlackalula Yellow. And another example is one of my own breeding tomatoes, which is not a true semi-hollow, but has some similarities. I love the pretty green color. So I did have a little bit of a red or pink tomato in there, but it was mostly the green bell semi-hollow. Very nice. So that's the pulp. Again, we'll just run it through 2 passes and that one will be good to go. So it's less physical work pushing this through versus the first pass. It's already mushed up, it's much easier. Nice and quick. Pulp is dry. Beautiful, beautiful sauce. Here's the input, a beautiful rainbow of tomatoes in the hopper, and the output, a beautiful rainbow of dried up pulp, and a nice bucket of sauce for all of your hard work. You can make a beautiful green sauce with green tomatoes, or you can make a yellow sauce with yellow tomatoes, or a nice thick sauce. Better yet, a rainbow sauce. If you put rainbows in, you will get rainbows out. Just imagine all of the healthy antioxidants in this diverse blend of tomatoes. You can't buy this in the grocery store. Thanks for watching. Links are in the description.